The elevator hummed softly as it climbed to the 31st floor, a sleek cocoon of steel and glass carrying James Carter through the quiet heart of his empire. It was 11:47 p.m., and the Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the tinted windows, a constellation of ambition that never slept. James, however, was exhausted. His tailored navy suit, still crisp despite the long day, clung to his broad shoulders as he leaned against the polished wall, his phone glowing in his hand. A cascade of unread emails stared back at him, contracts, deadlines, investor demands, all blurring into a single, relentless hum. He rubbed his temple, the faint throb of a headache settling in. Another late night. Another battle won in the world of high-stakes real estate development. But the victory felt hollow, as it always did. The elevator doors parted with a soft chime, revealing the dim hallway of Carter Properties headquarters. The marble floor gleamed under the muted glow of recessed lights, and the air carried the sterile scent of glass cleaner and corporate ambition. Most of the staff had left hours ago, their cubicles dark, their chairs tucked neatly against desks. Only the low drone of the air conditioning broke the silence, a sound so constant James barely noticed it anymore. His polished loafers clicked against the floor as he strode toward his corner office, his mind already half buried in tomorrow's meetings. A new luxury development in Tribeca was teetering on the edge of collapse. Investors were restless, and his senior VP, Tom Reynolds, had been breathing down his neck all week, questioning his focus. "You're spread too thin, James," Tom had said that afternoon, his voice edged with frustration. "This project could make or break us." James pushed the thought aside as he reached the heavy glass door to his office, its frosted surface etched with his name in sharp gold letters. James Carter, CEO. He expected silence, stillness, the familiar sanctuary of his meticulously organized space. But as he swung the door open, he froze. Someone was there. A small shape crouched near the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city's jagged horizon. The figure moved slowly, rhythmically, a shadow against the faint glow of streetlights, filtering through the glass. James's first thought was that he was imagining if fatigue had played tricks on him before, conjuring fleeting shapes in the corners of his vision after too many sleepless nights. But this was no illusion. The shape was a child. A little girl, no older than 6, her tiny frame dwarfed by a loose blue jumpsuit that sagged from her shoulders. Her hands, encased in oversized yellow rubber gloves, clutched a sponge that scraped methodically at a stubborn mark on the polished tile floor. Beside her sat a plastic bucket, its cloudy water sloshing with each motion. James stood rooted in the doorway, his phone forgotten in his hand, the emails irrelevant. The girl hadn't noticed him yet. Her chestnut hair, pulled into a messy braid, swayed slightly as she worked, her movements precise, almost desperate, as if the floor held the key to her survival. He blinked, trying to make sense of the scene. A child. In his office. At midnight. Clinging. He took a cautious step forward, the click of his shoe against the tile breaking the silence. The girl's head snapped up, her wide brown eyes meeting his. They were too big for her face, too heavy with something that didn't belong in a child's gaze. Resignation, perhaps, or a quiet strength that made James's chest tighten. She didn't flinch or scramble to her feet. She just stared, her hand stilling on the sponge, waiting. "What are you doing here?" James's voice came out low, tinged with disbelief. He took another step, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft thud. The girl blinked once, then looked down at the sponge in her hand. "I'm cleaning," she said, her voice small but steady, as if the answer were obvious. "Cleaning?" James repeated, sharper now, a mix of confusion and rising anger. "You're a child. Why are you cleaning my office at midnight?" She didn't look up this time. Her fingers tightened around the sponge, water dripping onto the floor. "Because I have to," she said. "I'm alone." No one else will help. The words hit James like a physical blow. He stood there, stunned, as 1,000 thoughts collided. In his mind, legal liability, security breaches, how she'd gotten past the guards downstairs. But none of them mattered as much as the image before him. A 6-year-old girl, alone, scrubbing his floor like a servant in the dead of night. He crouched down, his suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders, bringing his eyes level with hers. "Who brought you here?" he asked, softer now, though his voice still trembled with something he couldn't name. "My aunt," she said, her gaze flickering to his for a moment before dropping again. "She works at night. I help her. She says if I help, she'll let. Stay. Stay where?" James pressed, his jaw clenching. "Her apartment," the girl said. "It's small. She says I have to earn it." James's hands tightened into fists, the polished veneer of his life cracking under the weight of her words. He stood abruptly, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Stay here," he said, his tone clipped as he dialed his assistant. "Get security. Now." The head of security, a burly man named Harris with a no-nonsense demeanor, arrived within minutes, his expression shifting from confusion to shock when he saw the girl. James didn't wait for explanations. "Find the woman listed on the janitorial staff's after-hours log," he said. "I want her out of the building, now." Harris nodded, already speaking into his radio as he left the room. James turned back to the girl, who hadn't moved. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the sponge still in her hand, her eyes fixed on the bucket as if it held answers he couldn't see. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now, though his heart was racing. "Lily," she said quietly. "Lily Harper." "Lily," he repeated, the name settling into his mind like a stone dropped into still water. He walked to his desk, his polished exterior at odds with the chaos in his head. There were laws against this child labor, neglect, endangerment. People were supposed to care. Systems were supposed to protect. Yet here she was, a child alone in his office, her small hands raw from scrubbing. He sat behind his desk, watching her, trying to reconcile the world he knew with the one she lived in. The phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Tom Reynolds, his voice sharp through the speaker. "James, where are you?" "We need to finalize the Tribeca specs tonight. The investors are losing patience." "Not now, Tom," James said, his eyes still on Lily. "Something's come up. Something more important than a $200 million deal." Tom's tone was incredulous, bordering on accusatory. "Yes," James said, and hung up before Tom could argue. He didn't care about the deal, not in this moment. He looked at Lily, who was watching him now, her expression unreadable, but her eyes too tired for a child her age. "You're not staying here tonight," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "Not in this building." Her brow furrowed, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "Where am I going?" James hesitated. The logical part of his mind screamed at him, "Call child services, follow protocol, protect your reputation." But the image of Lily, small and steady, scrubbing his floor at midnight, drowned out the logic. He thought of his own childhood, the cold beds of the orphanage, the endless parade of faces that never stayed. No one had stepped in for him. No one had looked at him and said, "I won't walk away. You're coming with me," he said, the decision reckless, impulsive, utterly unlike him. Just for tonight, Lily didn't protest. She stood, clutching her bucket, the sponge still in her gloved hand. James took the bucket from her gently, setting it on the floor. "You don't need that," he said. She nodded, but her fingers lingered on the handle for a moment, as if letting go was a risk she wasn't sure she could take. The ride down the elevator was silent. Lily stood beside him, her small sneakers barely making a sound against the floor. James's phone buzzed again. Another email. Another demand. But he ignored it. The security desk in the lobby was empty now, Harris likely dealing with the aunt. James didn't care to hear her excuses. He didn't care about her desperation or her reasons. He only cared that a child had been left to clean floors in the middle of the night, hidden behind the hum of his pristine office life. Outside, the air was cool, a faint drizzle blurring the city lights. James's black town car waited at the curb, its driver, Marcus, raising an eyebrow but saying nothing as James opened the door for Lily. She climbed into the back seat, her legs swinging slightly above the floor, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't seem afraid, only tired, her eyes drifting toward the window where raindrops streaked the glass. James slid in beside her, the leather seat creaking under his weight. He glanced at her from time to time, trying to make sense of what he was doing. He was a man who thrived on control, on calculated risks and predictable outcomes. This wasn't calculated. This wasn't a decision at all. It felt like something else, something inevitable, like the city lights that burned through the rain. Indifferent but undeniable dot as the car pulled away from the curb. James's phone buzzed again. He silenced it without looking. For the first time in years, the world he built, the deals, the deadlines, the empire, felt like it could wait. Lily Harper, a child he'd known for less than an hour, was rewriting the rules of his life. And somewhere deep inside him, something cracked. Open, something he thought had long since turned to stone. The penthouse was a fortress of silence, its vast spaces carved from glass and steel, designed to keep the chaos of the world at bay. James Carter stood in the marble-floored foyer, the faint hum of the private elevator fading behind him as he watched Lily Harper take her first tentative steps into his home. The city's lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood. Lily's sneakers squeaked softly, her small frame dwarfed by the towering ceilings and minimalist decor. She clutched the hem of her oversized blue jumpsuit, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet efficiency that unnerved James. She wasn't gawking at the luxury or shrinking from it. She was assessing it, as if calculating her place in a world that didn't seem to want her. James set his keys on the glass console table, the clink echoing in the stillness. "This is where you'll stay tonight," he said, his voice sounding louder than intended. Lily nodded, her braids swaying slightly, but she didn't speak. Her silence wasn't defiance or fear, it was something else, something that reminded James of himself at her age, navigating a world where words rarely changed outcomes. He led her down the hall, past the sleek kitchen with its untouched appliances, and the living room with its leather sectional that had never hosted a guest. The guest bedroom was at the end of the corridor, a space he hadn't entered in years. He pushed the door open, revealing a room as pristine as the rest of the penthouse. White walls, a queen-size bed with crisp linens, a single dresser, and a reading lamp that cast a soft glow. "This is yours for now," he said, hesitating. He wasn't sure what tone to use with a 6-year-old. Authoritative? Gentle? He settled for neutral, gesturing toward the bed. "If you need anything, I'm across the hall." Lily stepped inside, her sneakers leaving faint smudges on the hardwood. She scanned the room, her gaze lingering on the bed, then the lamp, then the window where rain streaked the glass. She sat on the edge of the mattress, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "Thank you," she said, her voice so soft it barely reached him. James blinked, caught off guard by her composure. "You're welcome," he replied, lingering in the doorway. She didn't ask for a story or a glass of water. She didn't cry or cling. She just sat there, small and self-contained, as if she'd learned long ago not to expect more than what was offered. After a moment, he closed the door gently and stood in the hallway. Exhaling a breath, He hadn't realized he was holding. He didn't go to his room. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, the city's glow painting the countertops in shades of silver. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light as he leaned against the island. The penthouse had always been his refuge, a place where he could control every detail: temperature, lighting, solitude. But now, with a child down the hall, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful, as if the walls were. Waiting to see what he would do next. His phone buzzed on the counter. Tom Reynolds' name flashing on the screen. James ignored it, sipping his drink. He didn't have answers for Tom's questions about the Tribeca project, not tonight. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the image of Lily scrubbing his office floor, her small hands raw from the sponge. He thought of his own childhood, the orphanage with its sagging bunk beds and lockers that never locked. He'd been Lily's age when he realized no one was coming for him, when he learned to survive by being invisible. The memory was a dull ache, one he'd buried under years of ambition and success. But Lily had brought it back, sharp and unyielding. A soft knock at the front door pulled him from his thoughts. He set the glass down and crossed the foyer, opening the door to find Margaret Maggie Walsh, his housekeeper of 10 years. Maggie was in her late 50s, her graying hair pulled into a neat bun, her face creased with the kind of warmth that made people trust her instantly. She carried a canvas tote bag, her coat damp from the rain. "I got your message." She sighed, stepping inside. "A child? James? Really?" "It's temporary," he said, though the words felt less certain than they had an hour ago. She was alone. I couldn't leave her there. Maggie raised an eyebrow, her skepticism softened by a knowing smile. "You don't do temporary, James. Not with something like this." She handed him the tote bag. "Clean clothes, a toothbrush, some basics for her. I'll bring more tomorrow." "Thanks, Maggie," he said, taking the bag. "I don't know what I'm doing here." "Nobody does at first," she replied, patting his arm. "Just don't scare her off with that boardroom glare of yours." She turned to leave, then paused. "And get some sleep. You look like you're carrying the world." James watched her go, the door clicking shut behind her. He returned to the guest room, knocking lightly before entering. Lily was still sitting on the bed, her posture unchanged. "Maggie brought you some things," he said, setting the bag on the dresser. "You can change if you want. There's a bathroom through that door." Lily nodded, sliding off the bed to inspect the bag. She pulled out a pair of pajamas, soft gray with a pattern of tiny stars, and held them up, her fingers tracing the fabric. "These are new," she said, almost to herself. "They're yours," James said, leaning against the doorframe. "You don't have to earn them." Her eyes flicked to his, searching for something: truth, maybe, or a catch. She nodded again and disappeared into the bathroom, the door closing with a soft click. James stood there, listening to the faint sound of water running, his mind racing. He needed a plan, legal advice, answers. He pulled out his phone and dialed his lawyer. Richard Hayes, a man who'd navigated Carter properties through countless high-stakes deals. "James, it's midnight." Richard's voice was groggy but sharp. "What's wrong?" "I need you to look into emergency guardianship laws," James said, keeping his voice low. "There's a child. She was working in my office tonight, alone. Her aunt's gone, and I brought her home." There was a long pause. "You did what?" Richard's tone shifted from sleepy to incredulous. "James, you can't just take a kid home. There are protocols, child services, background checks, liability. You're opening yourself up to a legal nightmare." "I know," James said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Just find out what I need to do to keep her out of the system, at least for now." Richard sighed. "I'll start digging first thing in the morning." But you need to report this to Child Services tonight, and pray this doesn't blow up in your face." James ended the call, his stomach twisting. He knew Richard was right, but the thought of handing Lily over to a system that had failed her and him made his blood run cold. He returned to the kitchen, the scotch untouched now, and sat at the counter, staring out at the city. The rain had stopped, leaving the skyline sharp and unyielding, a reminder of the world he'd mastered. But this was uncharted territory. The next morning came too soon. James was up by 6 a.m., dressed in a fresh suit, his laptop open. On the dining table as he scanned emails. The Tribeca project was unraveling. Tom had sent 3 messages overnight, each more urgent than the last. James ignored them, his focus shifting when he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Lily appeared in the doorway, still in the star-patterned pajamas, her hair a tangled mess but her face clean. She looked smaller against the vastness of the penthouse, but she stood with a quiet dignity that made her seem older than her years. "Good morning," James said, closing his laptop. "Good morning," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Standing up, she hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." He led her to the kitchen, navigating the unfamiliar territory of caring for a child. He didn't cook. Chefs came 3 times a week to stock his fridge with prep meals. But this morning, he pulled eggs from the refrigerator and stood stiffly at the stove, cracking them into a pan. The sizzle filled the silence as Lily sat at the counter, watching him with those wide, searching eyes. He slid a plate of slightly overcooked scrambled eggs in front of her, and she ate slowly, neatly, not wasting a bite. James watched her, fascinated by her precision, her restraint. Most children he'd seen, his employees' kids at company events, were loud, messy, demanding. Lily was none of those things. His phone rang, shattering the moment. It was an unknown number, but he answered, stepping into the living room. "James Carter," he said. "This is Clara Nguyen from the Department of Family Services," a crisp voice replied. "We received a report about a minor, Lily Harper, found in your office last night. I need to schedule a home visit to assess her situation." James's grip tightened on the phone. "When?" "Today," Clara said. 2 p.m. I'll need to speak with you and the child." "Fine," he said, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. "I'll be here." He hung up, turning to find Lily watching him from the kitchen. "Who was that?" she asked, her fork hovering above her plate. "Someone who wants to make sure you're okay," James said, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on him, as if she could sense the weight he was carrying. After breakfast, she returned to the guest room, and James called Maggie, asking her to bring more clothes and a few children's books. "She's so quiet," he said, lowering his voice. "It's not normal, is it?" "She's been through more than most adults," Maggie replied. "Give her time, James, and give yourself some grace." By noon, Maggie arrived with a stack of books and a bag of clothes, her presence a steadying force. She checked on Lily, who was sitting cross-legged on the guest room floor, staring out the window. "She's a tough one," Maggie said, joining James in the kitchen. "But she's scared. You can see it in the way she holds herself." James nodded, his mind drifting to a memory he hadn't touched in years. A worn copy of The Secret Garden, the only book he'd owned in the orphanage, its pages soft from countless readings. He'd clung to it, not for the story, but for the idea that something could be his. He wondered if Lily had ever had anything like that, anything that wasn't tied to survival. At 2 p.m., Clara Nguyen knocked on the door. She was in her early 40s, her neat blazer and clipboard giving her an air of quiet authority. James welcomed her in, his boardroom confidence masking the unease in his chest. Clara's eyes swept the penthouse, taking in the luxury with a neutral expression. "Where is Lily?" she asked. James called for her, and Lily emerged, still in the pajamas, her hands clasped tightly. Clara knelt to her level, her voice gentle but probing. "Hi, Lily. I'm Clara. Can you tell me what happened last night?" Lily glanced at James, then back at Clara. "I was cleaning," she said. "Mr. Carter found me. He brought me here." Clara nodded, making a note. She asked about Lily's aunt, her living situation, her needs. Lily answered in short, careful sentences, her composure unnerving. When Clara finished, she stood, turning to James. "Mr. Carter, I appreciate you stepping in, but this is a serious matter. We'll need to conduct a full investigation. For now, Lily can stay here, but you'll need to comply with our process." "I understand," James said, his jaw tight. "Whatever it takes." Clara left, her clipboard tucked under her arm, and James closed the door, the silence returning. He looked at Lily, who was standing in the hallway, her eyes fixed on the floor. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but before she turned away, she said, "You didn't have to do this." James crouched down, meeting her gaze. "Yes, I did," he said. "And I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Lily's lips curved into the faintest smile, a flicker of trust in a world that had given her little reason to believe. The morning light filtered through the penthouse windows, casting a pale glow across the kitchen where James Carter stood, stirring a pot of oatmeal with the precision of a man diffusing a bomb. He'd never cooked breakfast 2 days in a row, and the task felt as foreign as the small girl sitting at the counter, her legs swinging slightly above the floor. Lily Harper, still in the star-patterned pajamas Maggie had brought, watched him with those wide, unblinking brown eyes, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried a weight, as if they were both testing the edges of this new reality. James slid a bowl of oatmeal in front of her, sprinkled with a handful of blueberries he'd found in the fridge. "Eat up," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "You've got a big day." Lily nodded, spooning the oatmeal with the same careful precision she'd shown with the eggs yesterday. "What kind of day?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. Clara Nguyen, the social worker, was returning at noon for a follow-up visit, and James had spent half the night on the phone with his lawyer Richard Hayes, navigating the labyrinth of guardianship laws. He'd also enrolled Lily in a nearby private school, a temporary measure until he could sort out her situation. "You're starting school today," he said, keeping his tone light. "And someone's coming to talk to us later, just to check in." Lily's spoon paused mid-her, her eyes flicking to his. "Are they going to take me away?" The question hit like a punch. James leaned against the counter, his hands gripping the edge. "No one's taking you anywhere," he said, meeting her gaze. "I'm handling it." She nodded, but her shoulders remained tense, her trust as fragile as the morning light. James turned away, busying himself with the coffee maker to hide the knot in his chest. He wasn't used to making promises, especially ones he wasn't sure he could keep. The system cold, bureaucratic, unyielding loomed like a shadow over them both. By 10 a.m., Maggie Walsh arrived with a stack of school supplies and a navy blue uniform that made Lily look even smaller. "She's got everything she needs," Maggie said, handing James a backpack adorned with a cartoon fox. "Books, pencils, a lunchbox. I even threw in a few snacks." "Thanks, Maggie," James said, glancing at Lily, who was smoothing the hem of her uniform with careful fingers. "You didn't have to do all this." Maggie waved him off, her eyes twinkling. "Someone's got to keep you from drowning, James. Besides, she's a sweetheart. Look at her, all ready for school." Lily looked up, her braid neater now, thanks to Maggie's deft hands. "Do I look okay?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "You look perfect," James said, surprised by the warmth in his own voice. He knelt to her level, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "You'll do great." The school, a brick building with ivy-covered walls, was a short drive from the penthouse. James walked Lily to the front gate, ignoring the curious stares from other parents. The principal, a kind-eyed woman named Miss Ellison, met them in the lobby and introduced Lily to her teacher, a young woman with a bright smile. "You'll be in good hands, Lily," Miss Ellison said. "And this is Sophie Bennett, one of our star students. She'll show you around." Sophie, a girl with curly red hair and a gap-toothed grin, took Lily's hand without hesitation. "Come on, I'll show you the best desk," she said, pulling Lily toward the classroom. Lily glanced back at James, her eyes wide but not afraid, and he gave her a nod, his chest tightening as she disappeared down the hall. Back at the penthouse, James barely had time to open his laptop before Clara Nguyen arrived, her clipboard as ever-present as her no-nonsense demeanor. She sat across from him in the living room, her eyes sweeping the space with clinical precision. "Mr. Carter," she began, "I need to understand your intentions. Taking in a child you found in your office is unconventional, to say the least." James leaned forward, his hands clasped. "She was alone, scrubbing my floor at midnight. Her aunt abandoned her. What was I supposed to do? Leave her there?" Clara's expression softened, but only slightly. "I appreciate your compassion, but the system has protocols. Lily's situation is complex. We've located records suggesting her mother may still be alive, though she lost custody years ago due to substance abuse. We're trying to contact her." James's stomach dropped. A mother. The possibility hadn't occurred to him, not after the aunt's negligence. "What does that mean for Lily?" he asked, his voice steady despite the sudden churn in his gut. "It means we need to explore all options," Clara said. "If her mother is stable, she may petition for custody. In the meantime, we'll assess your home for temporary placement. But you need to understand, Mr. Carter, this isn't a simple process. You're a single man with no parenting experience, and your lifestyle high-profile, demanding raises questions." James's jaw tightened. "I can provide for her. Stability, education, safety, whatever she needs." Clara made a note, her pen scratching against the paper. "Providing isn't the same as parenting. We'll need to see how Lily adjusts, how you handle her emotional needs. I'll be back tomorrow to speak with her alone." As Clara left, James felt the walls of his carefully controlled world closing in. He paced the living room, his phone buzzing with another message from Tom Reynolds. "Tribeca meeting at 3. Don't bail again." James ignored it, his mind racing. A mother. The word conjured images of someone who might take Lily away, someone who hadn't been there when she needed her most. He thought of his own childhood, the endless nights in the orphanage, waiting for a family that never came. He couldn't let that happen to Lily. That afternoon, James picked Lily up from school, his black town car idling outside the gate. She climbed in, her backpack heavier with books, her face lit with a quiet excitement. "Sophie showed me the library," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "They have books about castles." "That's great," James said, forcing a smile. "Did you like it?" She nodded, then hesitated. "Some kids asked where I live. I didn't know what to say." James's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You live with me," he said. "That's enough for now." Back at the penthouse, Maggie was waiting with a stack of children's books she'd found at a bookstore. "Thought these might help," she said, handing Lily a copy of Charlotte's Web. Lily's eyes widened, her fingers tracing the cover. "Can I read it here?" she asked, glancing at James. "Of course," he said, leaning against the doorframe as she settled on the guest room floor, her small body curled around the book. He watched her for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration, and felt a pang of something unfamiliar, pride, maybe, or hope. That evening, As the city lights flickered on, James sat at his desk, sorting through a box of old files from his office. He'd asked his assistant to pull anything related to the janitorial staff, hoping to understand how Lily had ended up there. Tucked among the papers was a faded document, a personnel record for a woman named Sarah Harper, listed as Bus, a former employee who'd left abruptly 3 years ago. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Next of kin, Lily Harper, daughter." James's breath caught. Sarah Harper, Lily's mother. Alive. His phone rang, pulling him from the discovery. It was Tom Reynolds, his voice sharp with frustration. "James, you missed the Tribeca meeting. The investors are furious. What's going on with you?" "I told you. Something came up," James said, his eyes still on the document. "Something like a kid you found in your office?" Tom's tone was incredulous. "This isn't you, James. You're risking everything. Your reputation, the company, for what? A charity case?" "She's not a charity case," James snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "She's a child who needed someone, and I'm not walking away." Tom sighed. "You're making a mistake. This could cost you everything." James hung up, his heart pounding. He looked at the document again, Sarah Harper's name staring back at him. The possibility of her return was a storm cloud on the horizon, threatening the fragile peace he and Lily were beginning to build. He thought of her question that morning, "Are they going to take me away?" and felt a resolve harden inside him. He didn't know what Sarah Harper wanted or what the system would demand, but he knew one thing. He wasn't letting Lily go without a fight. That night, as he tucked Lily into bed, she clutched Charlotte's Web to her chest. "Will you read?" "To me?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. James hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed, opening the book. His voice, usually reserved for boardrooms, softened as he read about Wilbur and Charlotte, the words weaving a quiet magic in the room. Lily's eyes grew heavy, her breathing slowing, and for the first time, James felt the weight of her trust, fragile but real, settling into his hands. As he closed the book and turned off the lamp, he glanced at the window, where the city's lights burned bright against the dark. Somewhere out there was a woman who might change everything. But in this moment, with Lily asleep and the book still warm in his hands, James knew he'd do whatever it took to keep her safe. The Manhattan skyline shimmered under a gray afternoon sky, its edges softened by a thin mist that clung to the penthouse windows. James Carter stood in his home office, the polished surface of his desk cluttered with contracts and blueprints for the Tribeca project, though his attention was elsewhere. His phone buzzed incessantly, another email from Tom Reynolds, another reminder of the investor's impatience, but James ignored it, his eyes fixed on the faded personnel record he'd found last night. Sarah Harper. Next of kin, Lily Harper. Daughter. The words stared back at him, a quiet threat to the fragile world he and Lily were building. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Lily stood in the frame, her school uniform slightly wrinkled, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her braid was coming loose, strands of chestnut hair framing her face. "I'm home," she said, her voice steady but her eyes searching his, as if sensing the shift in his energy. "Good," James said, forcing a smile. "How was school?" "Sophie let me borrow her colored pencils," Lily said, setting her backpack on the floor. "We drew a castle together." "That's great," James replied, his mind only half present. He wanted to ask more, to keep her talking, but the weight of Sarah Harper's name pressed against him, a storm cloud he couldn't outrun. "Why don't you grab a snack?" Maggie left some fruit in the kitchen. Lily nodded and disappeared down the hall, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the hardwood. James sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. He'd spent the morning on the phone with Richard Hayes, his lawyer, who'd confirmed that Sarah Harper was alive, last known to be in a recovery program in Brooklyn. If she's clean and stable, she could petition for custody, Richard had warned. You need to be prepared, James. Prepared. The word felt hollow. James had built an empire on preparation, anticipating risks, outmaneuvering competitors. But this was different. This was Lily, the girl who'd looked at him with tired eyes and trusted him to keep her safe. The thought of losing her to a woman who'd abandoned her years ago made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since the orphanage. When hope was a luxury, he couldn't afford. His phone rang, the sharp tone cutting through the silence. It was his assistant, Lara, her voice tense. Mr. Carter, there's a woman here to see you. She says her name is Sarah Harper. She's insistent. James's heart stopped. He glanced toward the hallway, where Lily was humming softly in the kitchen, oblivious to the earthquake about to hit their lives. Send her up, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. And tell security to be discreet. He stood, smoothing his tie, his boardroom instincts kicking in. He didn't know what Sarah Harper wanted, but he'd face her. Head on, for Lily's sake. He walked to the foyer, the marble floor cool beneath his shoes, and waited as the elevator hummed its ascent. When the doors parted, a woman stepped out, her presence both fragile and determined. Sarah Harper was in her early 30s. Her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her face pale but clear-eyed. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hands clasped tightly around a worn purse. Her eyes, the same deep brown as Lily's, met James's with a mix of nervousness and resolve. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice soft but steady. I'm Sarah Harper, Lily's mother. James studied her, searching for traces of Lily in her features. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her mouth. They were there, faint but undeniable. I was told you were out of the picture, he said, his tone neutral, but his stance guarded. I was, Sarah admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. I was addicted. I lost everything: my job, my home, my daughter. But I've been clean for over a year. I finished a recovery program. I have a job now. A place to live. I'm not here to cause trouble. I want to see her. James's jaw tightened. Part of him wanted to send her away, to protect Lily from the pain of a past she barely remembered. But another part, the part that remembered waiting for someone, anyone, to come back for him, understood the courage it took to stand here, asking for forgiveness. She doesn't know you're alive, he said, his voice low. This could hurt her. I know, Sarah said, her eyes glistening. I'm not asking to take her. I just want to talk to her, to explain. Please. James didn't answer right away. He thought of Lily, humming in the kitchen, her small world already so fragile. I'll need to talk to her first, he said finally. And it'll be supervised. A social worker will be present. Sarah nodded, relief flickering across her face. Thank you, she whispered as she left. James closed the door, his hands trembling slightly. He returned to the kitchen, where Lily was peeling an orange, her fingers careful and precise. Who was that? She asked, not looking up. Someone I needed to meet, James said, keeping his tone light. Nothing to worry about. But worry was exactly what settled into his bones as the day wore on. He called Clara Nguyen, informing her of Sarah's visit and requesting a supervised meeting. Clara agreed, scheduling it for the next afternoon. At a neutral location, a community center with a counselor on site. This is a delicate situation, Mr. Carter, Clara said. Lily's emotional well-being is our priority. James hung up, his mind racing. He needed to prepare Lily, but how do you tell a 6-year-old that her mother, presumed gone, was back? He thought of his own childhood, the social workers who delivered news with clinical detachment, their words leaving scars that never fully healed. He wouldn't let that happen to Lily. That evening, the penthouse was quiet, the city's. lights painting the walls in shades of gold. James found Lily in the guest room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing with the colored pencils Sophie had lent her. Her picture was of a castle, its towers uneven but vibrant. A tiny figure standing at the gate. "Is that you?" James asked, sitting beside her. Lily shook her head. "It's Sophie. She's the princess." James smiled, but it faded as he steeled himself. "Lily, I need to talk to you about something important." She looked up, her pencil stilling. "Am I in trouble?" "No," he said quickly, his heart aching at her assumption. "It's about your mom. She's alive. She wants to meet you." Lily's eyes widened, her small body tensing. "My mom?" she whispered. "I thought she was gone." "I did too," James said, his voice gentle. "She's been sick, but she's better now. She wants to talk to you, to explain things. You don't have to decide anything right now. I'll be there with you, if you want." Lily looked down at her drawing, her fingers tracing the castle's walls. "Does she want me to live with her?" "No," James said, his voice firm. "She just wants to see you. And only if you're okay with it." Lily was quiet for a long time, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "Can you come with me?" "Of course," James said, relief washing over him. He reached out, hesitating, then rested a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. The next afternoon, they arrived at the community center, a low brick building with colorful murals on the walls. Clara Nguyen was waiting, her clipboard replaced by a notebook, her demeanor professional but warm. A counselor, a woman named Dr. Ellis, greeted them, explaining the process in a calm, steady voice. James sat beside Lily in a small room with soft chairs and a table covered in crayons. Lily clutched her fox backpack, her eyes fixed on the door. When Sarah entered, the air seemed to shift. She knelt to Lily's level, her purse set aside, her hands empty and open. "Hi, Lily," she said, her voice trembling. "You're so much taller than I remember." Lily didn't respond, her fingers tightening on the backpack. James watched, his heart pounding, ready to intervene if needed. Sarah didn't push. She sat across from Lily, her eyes glistening but her voice steady. "I made a lot of mistakes," she said. "I wasn't there when you needed me, and I'm so sorry. I was sick, but I'm trying to be better now. I just wanted you to know that I love you, even if I didn't show it." Lily's gaze flicked to James, then back to Sarah. "I don't remember your voice," she said, her words soft but piercing. Sarah's face crumpled, but she nodded. "That's okay," she said, her voice breaking. "Maybe one day you will." The meeting lasted only 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Lily listened, her face calm but distant, while James sat silently, his hands clasped to keep them from trembling. When it was over, Sarah thanked them and left, her steps heavy. Dr. Ellis praised Lily's bravery, but Lily didn't smile. She leaned against James as they walked to the car, her silence louder than any words. Back at the penthouse, Lily retreated to her room, closing the door without a word. James stood in the hallway, the weight of her pain pressing against him. He called Maggie, his voice low. "She's not okay," he said. "I don't know how to help her." "Give her time," Maggie said, "and get her to someone who can. Help her talk about it. A therapist, maybe." James nodded, though Maggie couldn't see it. He hung up, his eyes drifting to the city beyond the windows, its lights indifferent to the turmoil inside his home. His phone buzzed Tom Reynolds, again, demanding a meeting about Tribeca. "You're losing focus, James," the message read. "This kid is dragging you down." James deleted it, his resolve hardening. Lily wasn't dragging him down. She was changing him, forcing him to face parts of himself he'd buried long ago. But as he stood in the quiet penthouse, the echo of Sarah's voice lingered, a reminder that the fight for Lily was far from over. The courtroom was smaller than James Carter had imagined. Its wood-paneled walls and worn benches stripped of the grandeur he'd expected from years of closing, multi-million-dollar deals in glass-walled boardrooms. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old paper and nervous anticipation. He sat at a table beside his lawyer, Richard Hayes, his tailored black suit immaculate, but his hands restless, fingers tapping lightly against the polished surface. Across from him, Lily Harper sat in a small chair, her Navy school uniform neatly pressed, her hands folded in her lap with a composure that made her seem older than 6. Her eyes, wide and brown, darted to James every few seconds, seeking an anchor in the unfamiliar room. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, peered over her glasses at the assembled group. James, Richard. Clara knew the social worker clutching her notebook, and a guardian ad litem, a young man named Mr. Patel, tasked with representing Lily's interests. In the back row, Sarah Harper sat alone, her hands clasped tightly, her face pale but resolute. She hadn't spoken since entering, her presence a quiet storm that James felt in every nerve. The hearing for temporary guardianship had come faster than James expected, a whirlwind of paperwork and late-night calls with Richard to prepare. Clara's home visits had been thorough, her questions probing, his income, his schedule, his capacity to parent a child with no prior experience. James had answered with the confidence of a man who'd built an empire, but inside, he was unraveling. The possibility of losing Lily to the system, or worse, to Sarah, a woman he barely knew, gnawed at him, a fear he hadn't felt since his days in the orphanage, waiting for a family that never came. The judge cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the tension. This hearing is to determine temporary guardianship for Lily Harper, a minor under the care of Mr. James Carter. Let's begin with the social worker's report. Clara stood, her notebook open. Your Honor, Lily was found working in Mr. Carter's office under neglectful conditions. Her aunt, listed as her guardian, has since relinquished custody. Mr. Carter stepped in, providing a stable home environment. Our visits confirm his residence is suitable, and Lily appears to be adjusting well. However, concerns remain about Mr. Carter's lack of parenting experience and his demanding career. Additionally, Miss Sarah Harper, Lily's biological mother, has recently re-entered the picture, expressing interest in visitation. James's jaw tightened at the mention of Sarah. He glanced at her, catching the flicker of pain in her eyes as Clara spoke. Since their meeting at the community center, Sarah had kept her distance, sending Lily a single letter through Clara, a short note apologizing again, promising to respect Lily's space. James had read it first, his heart torn between anger and pity. Sarah wasn't demanding custody, but her presence was a shadow, a reminder that Lily's future wasn't his to control. The judge nodded, turning to Mr. Patel and the guardian ad litem's assessment. Mr. Patel adjusted his tie, his voice measured. Lily is a resilient child, but she's experienced significant trauma. She expresses a strong attachment to Mr. Carter, who has provided stability and care. However, Ms. Harper's reappearance introduces complexity. I recommend continued counseling for Lily and a gradual approach to any contact with her mother. James exhaled, his fingers stilling. Lily's attachment to him was real. He felt it in the way she sought his gaze, the way she'd leaned against him after the meeting with Sarah. But the word trauma lingered, a weight he wasn't sure he knew how to carry. The judge turned to Sarah, her tone neutral. Ms. Harper, do you wish to address the court? Sarah stood, her hands trembling slightly. Your Honor, I'm not here to take Lily away, she said, her voice soft but clear. I know I failed her. I was addicted, and I lost her because of it. But I'm clean now, working, trying to rebuild my life. I just want to be part of hers, even if it's just visits. I support Mr. Carter's guardianship for now." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone. James glanced at Lily, who was staring at her hands, her face unreadable. He wanted to reach for her, to promise her safety, but the table between them felt like an ocean dot. The judge nodded, then turned to Lily, her voice softening. "Lily, can you tell me in your own words where you'd like to live?" The room held its breath. Lily looked up, her eyes meeting James's for a long moment before turning to the judge. "I want to stay with Mr. Carter," she said, her voice small but steady. "When I was with my aunt, I had to work to stay. Nobody talked to me. But with him, I feel important, like I matter." James's chest tightened, his eyes burning. He blinked rapidly, forcing himself to stay composed. Lily's words weren't just an answer. They were a lifeline, a declaration of trust that humbled him. He reached for her hand under the table, and she squeezed back, her small fingers warm and firm. The judge made a note, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Lily," she said. "This court grants temporary guardianship to Mr. James Carter. Pending further evaluation, Ms. Harper will be allowed supervised visits, to be coordinated through the Department of Family Services. We'll reconvene in 3 months." The gavel fell, a sharp sound that echoed in James's ears. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was enough. He exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide but calm, and he gave her a small smile. "We're okay," he whispered. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, the city bustling with indifference. James lifted Lily into the town car, her backpack slung over his shoulder. Sarah approached hesitantly, her purse clutched tightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "For taking care of her." James nodded, his guard still up. "She's my priority," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Sarah nodded and walked away, her figure shrinking into the crowd. Back at the penthouse, Maggie was waiting with a plate of cookies, her warmth a balm after the courtroom's cold formality. "How'd it go?" she asked, setting the plate in front of Lily. "We won," Lily said, her voice brighter than James expected. She took a cookie, nibbling it carefully, and James felt a surge of pride at her resilience. "Temporary when?" he corrected gently, sitting beside her. "But it's a start." That evening, as Lily drew in her room, James retreated to his office, the city's lights a glittering backdrop to his thoughts. The hearing had been a hurdle, but Clara's words about his career lingered. His phone buzzed. Tom Reynolds again, his message blunt. "Missed another meeting. Investors are pulling out. Fix this, James." He typed a reply, then deleted it. Tom didn't understand. The Tribeca project, once the center of his world, felt distant now, overshadowed by Lily's quiet presence. But Tom wasn't wrong. James's absence was costing the company, and whispers of his distraction were spreading. He thought of Lily's testimony, her small voice declaring him her safe place, and a new idea took root, one that had been simmering since the night he found her scrubbing his floor. He opened his laptop, pulling up a property listing for a rundown school in Brooklyn, a forgotten building he'd passed over months ago. It was cheap, structurally sound, and big enough for something more than condos. A community center, maybe, for kids like Lily children. Overlooked, passed between homes, told they were too much or not enough. A place where they could feel important. He typed a note to his assistant. Schedule a site visit for the Brooklyn property. Priority. The idea felt reckless, but it also felt right. He thought of Lily's castle drawing, her quiet pride in sharing it with Sophie. She'd inspired him, not just to fight for her, but to build something lasting. He named the project in his mind. Harper House, a tribute to the girl who'd cracked his world open. As he closed the laptop, a soft sound drifted from the hallway. Lily stood in the doorway, holding Charlotte's web. "Can you read again?" she asked, her eyes hopeful. James smiled, the weight of the day lifting slightly. "Sure," he said, gesturing for her to sit. As he read, her head rested against his arm, her breathing slowing. The city sparkled outside, indifferent but eternal. And for the first time, James felt like he was building something that mattered more than skyscrapers. The Brooklyn morning was crisp, the air carrying the faint tang of asphalt and budding trees as James Carter stepped out of his town car, his polished loafers crunching against the gravel lot. Before him stood the old school building, its red brick facade weathered but sturdy, its windows boarded up like eyes closed against the world. The property, a forgotten relic in a neighborhood of row houses and corner stores, was the seed of an idea that had taken root in James's mind. The night of the guardianship hearing. Harper House? A community center for children like Lily Harper, who'd been overlooked by a system that promised protection but delivered indifference. Lily stood beside him, her Navy school backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes wide as she took in the crumbling structure. "Is this it?" she asked, her voice small but curious. "This is it," James said, crouching to her level. "It's rough now, but we're gonna make it something special. A place for kids who need somewhere safe." Lily nodded, her braids swaying slightly. "Like me?" "Exactly like you," he said, his chest tightening at the quiet hope in her eyes. He stood, taking her hand as they followed the architect, a wiry man named Daniel, through the building's dusty halls. The interior was a maze of peeling paint and broken tiles, but Daniel's plans, sketched on a tablet he carried, promised a transformation. A reading room with soft lighting, an art studio filled with color, a kitchen where kids could eat without earning it. James listened, his mind racing with possibilities, but his attention kept drifting to Lily, who walked carefully, as if afraid to disturb the ghost of the place. Back at the penthouse that evening, the city's lights sparkled. Beyond the windows, a glittering contrast to the day's grid. Lily sat at the kitchen counter, sketching a mural for Harper House, a tree with branches full of stars, each star a child's name. James watched her, fascinated by her focus, her small hands steady despite the weight she carried. Since the courtroom, she'd grown brighter, her laughter more frequent, her drawings bolder. But the shadows lingered, surfacing in quiet moments like this, when her pencil paused, and her eyes grew distant. "Looks good," James said, leaning over to see her sketch. "You think we should paint it in the reading room?" Lily nodded, then hesitated. "Can Sophie come see it when it's done?" "Of course," James said, smiling. Sophie Bennett, Lily's friend from school, had become a lifeline, her cheerful presence helping Lily navigate the whispers of classmates who asked too many questions about her past. At school, Lily was thriving, her teacher reporting that she read above grade level and shared her snacks with Sophie during lunch. But James knew the progress was fragile, built on a foundation cracked by years of neglect. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Daniel, the architect, his voice tense. "James, we hit a snag with the Brooklyn property. The city's zoning board is pushing back something about community impact. We might need to delay construction." James's jaw tightened. "How long?" "Could be weeks," Daniel said. "Unless you pull some strings." James ended the call, his frustration simmering. Harper House was more than a project. It was a promise, a way to give Lily and others like her a future. But the city's bureaucracy, like the child welfare system, cared little for promises. He glanced at Lily, still sketching, and forced himself to stay calm. He'd fought bigger battles in boardrooms. He could handle this. The next morning, James drove Lily to a low-rise building in Midtown, the office of Dr. Rachel Ellis, the child therapist Clara had recommended. Lily clutched her Fox backpack, her steps hesitant as they entered the waiting room, its walls covered in colorful posters and stuffed animals. "Do I have to talk?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Only if you want to," James said, kneeling beside her. "Dr. Ellis is here to help. I'll be right outside." Dr. Ellis, a woman in her 40s with a warm smile, greeted Lily with a gentleness that eased her tension. "We'll just chat," she said, leading Lily to a room filled with toys and books. James sat in the waiting area, his laptop open but his mind elsewhere. He thought of Lily's nightmares, the way she'd woken last week, trembling, whispering about scrubbing stairs for her aunt. He'd held her until she fell back asleep, his heart breaking at her fear. Therapy was a step toward healing, but it also forced James to confront his own limitations. He couldn't fix her pain alone. An hour later, Lily emerged, her face calm but tired. "She's nice," she said, climbing into the car. "She asked about my drawings." "That's good," James said, relief washing over him. "You want to tell me more?" Lily shook her head, her eyes drifting to the window. James didn't push. He'd learned her silences weren't rejections, but spaces where she processed the world, and he was learning to wait. That afternoon, Maggie Walsh arrived at the penthouse with a stack of art supplies, her presence a steadying force. "For Harper House," she said, setting the box on the counter. "I figured the kids could use some color." "Thanks, Maggie," James said, glancing at Lily, who was sorting the supplies with quiet enthusiasm. "You're spoiling her." "Someone's got to," Maggie replied, winking at Lily. "How's the project going?" "Bumps in the road," James admitted, "but we'll get there." Maggie nodded, her eyes softening. "You're doing something good, James. For her, for all of them." As Maggie left, James's phone buzzed with a message from Clara Nguyen. "Received a letter from Sarah Harper for Lily. Will deliver tomorrow." James's stomach twisted. Sarah's letters, though infrequent, were a reminder of her presence, a thread connecting Lily to a past she barely remembered. He hadn't told Lily about this one yet, unsure how she'd react after the community center meeting. He thought of her words, "I don't remember your voice," and wondered if Sarah's letters would help or hurt Dot at school. Lily's progress continued. Sophie invited her to a group project, a diorama of a coral reef, and Lily spent evenings gluing tissue paper fish to a shoebox, her laughter filling the penthouse. But the nightmares persisted, surfacing after a particularly vivid one, where she woke crying, her hands scrubbing at imaginary floors. James sat with her, his voice low as he promised she was safe, but the incident shook him. He called Dr. Ellis the next morning, scheduling weekly sessions. One evening, as Lily worked on her diorama, James sat at his desk, reviewing emails about Harper House. The zoning issue was unresolved, and a local community group had raised concerns about gentrification, fearing the center would disrupt the neighborhood. James drafted a response, promising local hiring and free programs, but the resistance frustrated him. He thought of his days in the orphanage, where promises of change were empty, and vowed to make Harper House different. Lily appeared in the doorway, holding a letter. "Clara gave me this," she said, her voice quiet. "It's from my mom." James set his laptop aside, his heart racing. "Do you want to read it?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. She sat beside him, unfolding the paper with careful fingers. Sarah's handwriting was neat, her words simple. "Dear Lily, I'm thinking of you. I'm proud of how strong you are. I hope you're happy with Mr. Carter. Love, Mom." Lily read it silently, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" James asked, his voice gentle. "It's nice," Lily said, folding the letter. "But I don't know her." James nodded, relief and guilt mingling in his chest. "You don't have to decide anything now," he said. "We'll take it one step at a time." Lily leaned against him, her small body warm and trusting. Can we work on the mural tomorrow? She asked. Absolutely, James said, his smile genuine. As she returned to her room, he looked at the letter. Sarah's words a quiet echo in the penthouse. Harper House, Lily's laughter, the fight ahead. They were all part of a legacy he was building, not just for her, but for himself. A man who'd once believed solitude was enough. The courthouse loomed against a cold April sky, its gray stone facade as unyielding as the system it housed. James Carter sat in the back of his town car, his tailored charcoal suit crisp, but his hands restless, fingers smoothing an invisible crease in his tie. Beside him, Lily Harper clutched her Fox backpack, her light blue dress, chosen herself from a store James had taken her to glowing softly in the morning light. A silver bracelet, engraved with her initials, glinted on her wrist, a gift from James the day before. Her eyes, wide and brown, met his, and he gave her a small smile, though his heart pounded with a fear he couldn't name. The permanent guardianship hearing was today, a culmination of months of paperwork, home visits, and sleepless nights. James had prepared meticulously with his lawyer, Richard Hayes, answering every question, countering every doubt. But the system didn't care about his wealth or his empire. It cared about forms, precedents, and whether a single man with no parenting experience could be trusted with a child like Lily. The possibility of losing her to the foster system or to Sarah Harper, her biological mother, hung like a storm cloud, despite Sarah's assurances that she supported James's guardianship. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. The same judge from the temporary hearing, her sharp eyes softened slightly by time, sat at the bench, her gaze sweeping over the assembled group. James, Richard, Clara Nguyen with her ever-present notebook. Mr. Patel, the guardian ad litem, and Lily, who sat beside James, her hands folded neatly. Sarah Harper sat in the back, her dark hair pulled back, her face calm, but her hands clasped tightly. Tom Reynolds, James's colleague, was there too, a surprise presence that made James's chest tighten with unexpected gratitude. The judge opened the proceedings, her voice steady. We're here to determine permanent guardianship for Lily Harper. Let's begin with the social worker's report. Clara stood, her tone professional but warm. Your Honor, Mr. Carter has provided a stable, nurturing environment for Lily. She's thriving at school, participating in therapy, and forming healthy attachments. Our concerns about his lack of experience have been addressed through his commitment to Lily's emotional and physical needs. Ms. Harper, Lily's mother, has maintained supervised contact and supports Mr. Carter's guardianship. James exhaled, his fingers stilling on the table. Clara's words were a lifeline, but the judge's scrutiny was unrelenting. She turned to Mr. Patel, who nodded. Lily's progress is remarkable, he said. She's expressed a clear preference to remain with Mr. Carter, whom she views as her primary caregiver. I recommend permanent guardianship with provisions for Ms. Harper's visitation. The judge's eyes shifted to Sarah. Ms. Harper, do you wish to address the court? Sarah rose, her hands trembling slightly. Your Honor, I know I can't undo the past, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. I lost Lily because of my addiction, and I'll carry that guilt forever. But I'm clean now, working, stable. I don't want to disrupt her life. Mr. Carter's given her what I couldn't: a home, a family. I just want to be part of her life, as a friend, if she'll let me. James glanced at Lily, who was staring at her hands, her face unreadable. Sarah's words echoed her letter, her humility disarming, but her presence still a quiet threat. He thought of their meeting at the community center, Lily's soft confession, I don't remember your voice, and wondered if she'd ever find a place for Sarah in her heart. The judge nodded, then turned to James, her voice direct. Mr. Carter, how do you plan to balance your career with parenting? Your company's recent challenges have been noted. James's jaw tightened. The Tribeca project had faltered, investors pulling out after his repeated absences, and Tom's warnings had been relentless. But he stood, his voice calm. "Your Honor, my career is demanding, but I've restructured my schedule to prioritize Lily. I've hired additional staff to manage projects, and I'm present for her school therapy every moment she needs me. She's my family now." The judge made a note, then turned to Lily, her tone softening. "Lily, can you tell me where you want to live?" The room stilled, every eye on the small girl in the blue dress. Lily looked at James, her eyes searching his, then turned to the judge. "I want to stay with him," she said, her voice clear despite its softness. "He makes me feel safe, like I'm home." James's throat tightened, his hand reaching for hers under the table. She squeezed back, her small fingers steady, and he blinked back the burn in his eyes. Lily's words weren't just an answer. They were a vow, a trust he'd fight to keep. The judge paused, her pen scratching against the paper. After a long moment, she looked up, her voice gentle but firm. "This court grants permanent legal guardianship to Mr. James Carter with full parental rights and responsibilities. Ms. Harper will have supervised visitation, to be arranged through the Department of Family Services." The gavel fell, a quiet sound that shifted the world. James exhaled, his shoulders relaxing as relief flooded him. Lily looked up, her eyes wide and bright, and he pulled her into a hug, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "We did it," he whispered, his voice thick. Outside, the sky had cleared, sunlight glinting off the courthouse steps. Tom approached, his usual sharpness softened. "I was wrong about you," he said, clapping James's shoulder. "You're doing good, Carter." "Thanks for being here," James said, his voice genuine. Tom nodded and walked away, leaving James and Lily in the light. Back at the penthouse, Maggie had set out a celebratory spread, cupcakes, juice, and a banner that read, "Welcome home, Lily." Lily laughed, a sound that filled the sterile space with warmth, and James felt the walls of his fortress soften. As they ate, Lily slipped her bracelet off, showing him the engraved initials. "It's really mine," she said, her voice awed. "It's yours," James confirmed, his smile wide. "Always." That night, as Lily brushed her teeth, she paused at James's office door, her pajamas soft and familiar. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her eyes serious. "Anything," James replied, closing his laptop. "Are you my dad now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. James's heart stopped, then swelled. He knelt before her, meeting her gaze. "If you want me to be," he said, his voice thick, "I'd be honored." Lily nodded, her lips curving into a shy smile. "Okay, Dad," she said, the words soft but sure. James pulled her into a hug, her small body warm against his. As she padded back to her room, he stood in the hallway, the word "Dad" echoing in his chest. The city sparkled outside, indifferent, but eternal, and for the first time, James felt like he belonged not to the skyline, but to the girl who'd chosen him as home. The spring sun hung low over Brooklyn, its golden light filtering through the budding trees that lined the quiet street. Harper House stood proudly at the corner, its red brick facade now scrubbed clean, its windows gleaming with fresh glass. The old school, once a relic of neglect, had been transformed into a beacon of hope, its doors open for the first time to welcome children who, like Lily Harper, had known too much of the world's indifference. Banners in bright blues and greens fluttered above the entrance, hand-painted by local kids, their uneven letters spelling out "Welcome to Harper House." The air buzzed with soft chatter, the laughter of children, and the hum of possibility. James Carter stood on the front steps, his tailored suit replaced by a simple blazer and jeans, a choice that felt more honest today. His eyes swept over the small crowd: volunteers, social workers, a few of his colleagues from Carter Properties, and a group of children clutching balloons. Among them was Lily, her light blue dress swaying as she helped Sophie Bennett, her school friend, arrange a table of art supplies. At 7 now, Lily carried herself with a quiet confidence, her braid neat, her silver bracelet glinting in the sunlight. The sight of her, so far from the girl he'd found scrubbing his office floor a year ago, filled James with a warmth he'd once thought impossible. Maggie Walsh approached, her gray hair catching the light, a tray of lemonade in her hands. "You did it, James," she said, her smile warm. "This place, it's everything you said it would be." "We did it," James corrected, glancing at Lily. "She's the heart of it." Maggie nodded, her eyes softening. "She's a miracle, that one. And so are you for seeing her." The opening ceremony was simple. No press or fanfare, just a gathering of those who believed in the mission. A safe space for children in crisis, offering shelter, food, therapy, and education. James had poured his resources and his heart into Harper House, navigating zoning battles, community skepticism, and late-night doubts to bring it to life. Named for Lily, it was his promise to her, to the boy he'd been in the orphanage, and to every child who needed to be seen. Lily stepped forward, a small microphone in her hands, her voice steady despite the crowd's gaze. "Hi, everyone," she said, her words clear. "I'm Lily Harper. Welcome to Harper House. I'm going to show you around." James's chest swelled with pride as Lily led the first tour, her small frame guiding a group of children through the bright halls. She pointed out the reading room, its walls painted a soft lavender she'd chosen, its shelves lined with books she'd helped select. "This is where you can read anything you want," she said, her eyes bright. "There's even a corner for quiet if you need it." She moved to the art studio, where easels stood ready with blank canvases. "You can paint whatever you feel," she told the group, gesturing to a mural of stars she'd designed. "It doesn't have to be perfect." A boy, no older than 8, raised his hand shyly. "Can I paint my dog?" he asked. Lily nodded. "You can paint anything that makes you happy." In the kindness cupboard, a small room stocked with clothes, toiletries, and snacks, Lily paused, her voice softening. "This is for anyone who needs something," she said. "You don't have to ask or earn it. It's just here." James followed the tour, his eyes fixed on Lily. Her words carried a weight beyond her years, each one a testament to her journey. He thought of the night he'd found her, her hands raw from scrubbing, her eyes too tired for a child. Now, she was a leader, her presence filling the room with meaning. Clara Nguyen, the social worker, joined him, her notebook absent for once. "She's extraordinary," Clara said. "You've given her a home, Mr. Carter, but she's giving this place a soul." "She's teaching me more than I'm teaching her," James admitted, his voice low. "I didn't know I could feel like this." Clara smiled, a rare warmth in her eyes. "That's what family does." As the tour ended, the children scattered to explore, their laughter echoing through the halls. Lily returned to James, her face flushed with pride. "Did I do okay?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. "You were perfect," James said, kneeling to her level. "I'm so proud of you." She smiled, then hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. "I told them I know what it's like to feel like nobody," she said. "Was that okay?" James's throat tightened. He pulled her into a hug, her small body warm against his. "It was more than okay," he said. "You told them there's somebody. That's the best thing you could have done." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity, kids painting in the studio, volunteers serving sandwiches, Sophie and Lily giggling over a shared canvas. Sarah Harper arrived quietly, her presence unassuming, a letter for Lily tucked in her purse. She'd attended every supervised visit, her role evolving into that of a distant but supportive figure. She approached James, her eyes meeting his. "This place is incredible," she said. Thank you for giving her this." "She gave it to me," James said, his voice steady. "And to you, in a way." Sarah nodded, her gaze drifting to Lily. "I'm grateful she has you," she said, then handed him the letter. "For when she's ready." As the sun set, the crowd thinned, leaving James and Lily alone on the front steps, eating ice cream from paper cups. The city hummed in the distance, its lights flickering on like stars. Lily leaned her head on James's shoulder, her bracelet glinting softly. "I think we made something good," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "We made each other," James replied, his eyes on the horizon. He thought of the man he'd been a year ago, solitary, driven, empty, and the man he was now, a father, a builder of more than skyscrapers. Lily had cracked his world open, filling it with laughter, drawings, and a purpose he hadn't known he needed. Harper House was their legacy. It promised that no child would feel invisible again. The night wrapped around them, warm and gentle. And for the first time, forever felt like a word meant for them, a home built not of brick but of trust, choice, and love. This story, at its core, is about recognition, the profound human need to be seen, valued, and loved. James and Lily, two souls invisible in their own ways, find each other in a moment of chance and choose to build a family not bound by blood but by commitment. Their journey, slow and raw, is a testament to the power of small, persistent choices showing up, listening, staying. It reminds us that healing is possible, that family can be forged in the quiet spaces of trust, and that even the most guarded heart can open when someone brave enough walks through its silence. The lessons are universal. Every child deserves a champion, and every adult carries the capacity to change, to love beyond themselves. Harper House stands as a symbol of this truth, a place where the forgotten are remembered, where pain is met with kindness. It challenges us to look closer, to see the lilies in our own world, and to act with the courage James found within himself. More stories that touch the heart and inspire change. Subscribe to Legacy Stories on our channel. Join us to discover narratives that celebrate the beauty of human connection and the legacies we build together. Your support keeps these stories alive. Let's create a world where no one feels like nobody.